Ellen Chute is joining me today for the episode. And Ellen, this is going to be fun because I was raised by a father that's a systems guy, and I have a sister that's a social worker, and then I'm also in the field too. So
Yes.
anytime there's a colleague that has a lot of like-minded or similar overlap, man, it's a lot of fun to have the conversations like that. So I'm so excited to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And I love talking to systems people. I feel like I take systems and then add another layer to it. And so I'm really excited to tell you about my theories and what I
Yeah.
think and to chat about it.
Well, you just teed up perfectly to jump in, I guess. If you take
Okay.
systems and add another layer, so let's explain
Yes.
the layer.
So the layer is if we understand the power of a family system, and in my book, I use the metaphor of a car to describe a family. And we talk about everybody having their seat in the car and everybody having a role to play that, and everybody playing their role is what keeps the car going basically from today to tomorrow to the next day.
Right.
My The way that I take it further is to help people understand how that seat that they had in the car growing up actually created the person that they are today. And
Absolutely.
much of that is conscious and much of that is unconscious. And we take our learning from the car with us into our lives, into creating other cars, into our relationships, into our work, into our child rearing. We take that knowledge with us. And for the most part, it works for us. But all of us have these places in our life where that we wish were more satisfying or more loving or easier. And a lot of times, what is stopping those things from happening is the actual thing that we learned in the car growing up.
Okay. So
So this is,
let's unpack
yes.
that a little bit on
Okay.
because I love the metaphor,
Okay.
because I think if we can start to recognize dynamics, tendencies, preferences, insert qualifying characteristic
Yes.
here, right?
Yes.
Um,
Right.
so briefly describe like the places as you see them, or the
Sure.
impact they're in, because I think there's multi layers to this just from guessing where we're heading today.
Yes, there are. And I like to talk about my car growing up because I think that it's the one I know the best. And it's the
Perfect.
one that actually spurred this whole thing for me to come to understand, create the metaphor and understand it in this way. So I grew up as an only child. It just coincidentally, my parents were both also only children. So in our car growing up, my father was in the driver's seat. He was the wage earner back in those times, most dads
Hmm.
were. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, and her role was in the front passenger seat. But if you asked me who was really driving our car, I would probably say that even though my dad sat in that seat, that my mom really drove it because she directed every single movement that he made just from
Okay.
her seat. Okay.
Hmm.
My role in the car was to be alone in the back seat. I always was alone in the back seat. And all cars have their rules. And many times the rule is not spoken, but in our car, the
Oh yeah.
rule was spoken. And that rule was that little girls are to be seen and not heard. So I was a I was born a good girl, a rule follower. I was just going to go along with and
Hmm.
do what was expected of me. In my car, the secondary rule was that you look pretty at all times. It was just a very well put together car in terms of how everybody presented and looked. But my role in the back seat by myself gave me a vantage point to come to understand myself and the world that I wouldn't have had I been in a car with other children,
Hmm.
with sitting in a different seat in the car. I know other only children, and their seat in the car was the front passenger seat because one of the parents was in the back.
Right.
But my seat was in the back, being quiet, shutting up, not having any needs, and trying to look pretty. And while that may have worked really well for my parents' configuration, it didn't work so well for me as a grown up adult. And
Hmm.
I have spent much of my life and done much work on my life coming to overcome many of the things that I left my car with, which was not having a voice, being totally independent, not ever needing anybody's help.
Hmm.
Um, I would say that I was lonely in the back seat, and my life really has been about gathering people to me.
Hmm.
I have 3 kids and 7 grandkids, and they're all here all the time. And that's just, I think about the 3 of us in that car, and then I think about the 15 of us for dinner when we have dinner
Hmm.
every week.
Hmm.
And I think I did that. Like I wanted that. That was my creation as a result of my car experience.
Right. That's
Now,
almost like growing a voice, isn't it? That it goes
exactly.
against,
Yes.
what was kind of taught or expected early on, and now all of a sudden you're like, no, 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 I'm gonna create some power here and go different than my experience was.
Yes. When I can do that. But
Hmm.
I'll tell you that a lot of times in my life still, I have no voice when I wish I did. It's not so easy to just
Mm. Sure.
it's great to realize it, and that's what my book is about. Oh, that's why I wish I could just come back at this person, but I can't.
Hmm.
I've tried, I've worked on it. I can't at times. And so my book is about coming to understand that that's how you developed. This was no one's intent in my car that I developed like that. This was
Hmm.
just my understanding of who I was supposed to be. And I I have to now treat myself with compassion when I can't do it
Right.
because as much as I would like to, my body just isn't going to let me. It's
Right.
too scary. It's just too
Right.
scary.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, because these are
Exactly.
ingrown things that are like they're almost like there's I think there's this element of biology and then nurturing, right? What you're raised around, but
Yes.
also the way you're kind of biologically bent, if you will,
Yes.
because that's the
That's
differences
exactly
between
right.
introvert extrovert. Some people it's a learned thing. Some people it's just inherent. That's just who they
I
are.
I I completely agree.
Okay.
I'm grateful for my biology because I think it is why I have all these people around me now.
Hmm.
Because I just wasn't happy in this little small threesome. I like a lot. And so I'm happy that my biology was given opportunities to present itself in my life. My mother
Yeah.
used to tell the story when I was 2 years old that we would go to a restaurant and I'd be out of my seat and on the person at the next table's lap because I was always just gathering, looking for people to be part of my
Hmm.
life.
Okay.
So that's my story in a nutshell. And
Okay.
you can see the roles in the car are so powerful and they inform who we are. My husband is one of 5 boys, and he had the complete opposite experience of me.
Yeah.
He's 7 years younger. The 4 oldest ones were together, and then 7 years, and then him. And his seat in his car growing up was in the back end of an old station wagon, facing out, like
Yep.
looking out
Yeah.
at the
Facing
other
backwards.
people,
Yep.
facing backwards. And his job in that seat was to just sit and wave and make friends with the people around him. And if you would meet him today as a grown man, he is exactly that same person. He
Okay.
makes friends with the cashier at the grocery store, and he's just always looking for people to, in a nice way, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But
No, I got you.
it's still part of who he is, a
Yeah.
big part of who he is.
Well, that's what's so
Right.
crazy about thinking about this, Ellen, is the idea that the similarities of the two of you, because that 7 year gap for him almost creates a
Yes.
different generation where he's an only
Yes.
child. He doesn't have immediate
Absolutely.
siblings. I tell clients this a lot, that it's like, yeah, but they're
Yes.
like 5 years older. I'm like, yeah, but that's not a peer sibling. That's
Right.
just a sibling. They have a whole different world than you do, rather
Yes,
than
they
it's
do.
a cohort going through it
Right.
alongside. And so there's some similarities of just what you're telling your only
Uh-huh.
child,
Uh-huh.
his one of five, but kind of an only pseudo
Mm-hmm.
child, and
Mm-hmm.
as well
Yes.
as you're supposed to be in the back and just look good, just be
Right, that's
friendly,
true.
there's elements of,
Yes.
oh man, no wonder you guys made sense with each other.
It's very true. It's
Hmm.
very true. He also identifies as one of the Chute boys. And in his family, that was huge to be one of
Okay.
these boys. So he's very much in that and very much not in it. He's
Right.
very different than his four brothers. Right.
And so, what do you encourage people that could be listening to this, that all of a sudden they're, because as I'm hearing you talk, and maybe we do this in the extended content, and let's just kind of switch roles, and you walk me through it as if I was trying to like
Sure.
understand this, and we'll go personal on the extended content. But up until then, what do you tell people that would be the best to help them get the grasp of, okay, now what? Once I kind of picture where I am, and what drives me, the role I played, what was the message overtly and covertly. What do I do with that? How do I now apply that, like you're describing your journey has been of, I'm aware of it, but now what?
Right. So the goal of becoming aware of it is to forgive yourself for what it has left you with, to to learn self-compassion, to
Mm-hmm.
for you to say, "Oh, I totally get it. Of course this is going to scare me. Of course I'm afraid to be vulnerable in relationships. I was taught this. I was set up to be in
Mm-hmm.
this place."
Mm-hmm.
And so, what I talk to people about is that we learned this role when we were very young and we were completely dependent and we were powerless, virtually powerless
Right.
in our families. But as a grown up, we are not powerless anymore. Our body is still going to carry those memories, whether they have words attached to them or not, but we get to use our grown up brain now, our prefrontal cortex brain, and we get to be mindful and intentional about how we want to live and what we choose to do and how we act. We get to, just because we're human. And
Mm-hmm.
so just because we learned it one way doesn't mean we're stuck there. We can develop new learning,
Mm-hmm.
and definitely we can develop more self compassion, which will allow us to think, is that really what I want?
Yeah.
To be more goal directed, to be more values driven, to be less impulsive, less emotionally driven, and actually more aware of our emotions.
Yeah, and that's one of those. I mean, self-compassion is one of those difficult things to do at times, it seems.
Oh,
You know,
yes.
we can we can shame bomb ourselves all the time.
Oh, my goodness.
It's
And
that
that's
seems
what
easy
happens in the
for whatever
car.
reason. Mm.
Right. Our cars are what teach us to be ashamed of ourselves. Even if no one says that, even if we
Hmm.
have these kind, loving parents, one of our siblings is going to say it. What's wrong with you? You know what I mean? Even if it's under their breath, but that's where we learn to just immediately go to shame.
Hmm.
And we get to unlearn that. We get to learn that the shame is there, but I always talk about us being just a huge mosaic. And the shame is just one piece of it. And
Mm-hmm.
there's so much more of you than just that.
Right.
And
And
so
so
that's what we talk about.
the idea of moving to I use the terminology of when I recognize stuff from my past or things that are happening to me. Um, what I need to learn to do is digest it, which means I take some of the stuff that and I can use some of that for good. I can look at what all went down and see some of it is there's good parts in it, and then the rest needs to be let go and
Yes.
and move
Right.
on from me, right? And so
Yes.
if you're describing this process and a person can recognize that self-compassion is such a good idea in the sense of the step of I need to just treat myself better. I mean, I heard the
Right.
quote the other day. I don't remember who actually this came from, but it was a statement about if I if I actually allowed a friend to talk to me the way I talk to me, we would not be friends,
That's right.
right?
Right.
Because it's just so cruel a lot of
Yes.
the times. So you get to that point, and then you get to the element of now what do I do with it? Because you made the comment early on, recognizing it is one thing, but doing different is
Yes.
another.
Yes. And to me, that's what therapy is about. It's about
Okay.
helping people recognize it. Um, I had someone just the other day who was talking to me about how they just really seem to, this was a man actually, really seemed to have trouble with his wife who was leaving to go on a business trip. And we talked about that in his history, it must have just been hard for him that he perceived somebody as leaving, even if they didn't leave.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, oh, he got that. Okay. But then what do you do next?
Mm-hmm.
So you learn how to understand what's going on in your body when this thing happens and you're having a reaction.
Right.
Okay. And it's always either hurt or pain or fear or sadness, something like that. And if we can identify that feeling, it will actually help us to choose our response.
Okay.
So we don't have to just, normally we would be acting to try to shut that feeling up. But instead of shutting it up and acting on it, we're going to try to recognize it and then act according to our values. Now, that's not easy. It's
Mm-mm.
really not easy. I call it a practice. It's a practice, it's a journey, it
Mm-hmm.
takes time, but people do have success little bits at a time, feeling more in control of things, feeling better about themselves and more in control of their life. And, life happens to us. We have to deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
And so um, th- that is the ultimate goal. And therapy at every step of that process of encouraging someone to get to the feeling, of allowing them to just sit with that makes me sad or that scares me, um, and then to help them be okay that it's just a feeling. Feelings last about 90 seconds and then they go away.
Right.
And then to help them think about what would you really want here? What would be your value? And to support them through that change process. And the
Yeah.
first time they make a change, they could need a lot of support. They could feel guilty. They could
Oh,
feel
sure.
right. And so
And
to help
it
them
can even
through that.
magnify the fear or the uncertainty because now I'm out in a whole uncharted territory. That's like I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing now.
And if our identity is, whether there are words to it or not, but if our identity is, well, I'm not a person that does that, then when we do it, because,
Mm-hmm.
then it requires a lot of shifting on our parts. It's
Yeah.
very hard,
And
but
this is
it can
also
be
something
extremely rewarding.
Absolutely. And so this is something that I'm assuming you would agree with, that the goal ultimately is where I can recognize and do this in real time. But even if I do it after the fact, that's still good ground gained.
Oh, yes, it has. It's always started after the fact,
Perfect.
because it's at first it's only after the fact that we even have a thought of, oh, I hate that I keep doing this, or
Right.
this is really just getting to me. What happens to people often is that they go into just rather than a shame cycle, they go into a blame cycle. And they think that what's wrong is what the other person's doing rather than what's wrong is that my body isn't taking it well. My body's having a feeling. And so they try to get the other person to change what they're doing. This is just the classic thing in marriage. Could you please change your behavior so I can feel better about myself? Right? But
Right.
it's just comes from such a powerless point of view that I can't feel better about me unless you change.
Right.
And that's just, yeah,
Right.
that's not helpful. Right.
That's so
I mean,
good.
it
And
doesn't mean
I
the other person doesn't have to change, but I'm just saying.
well, yeah, that's that element of what do I actually control and influence, which is myself. And so if I can change it to where I see it as I can influence them or encourage them, maybe I can't
Yes.
change them. I'm not responsible for them. I'm responsible for me. So handle
Right.
my
Right.
steps in the dance, not theirs.
For sure. For sure.
Perfect. So before we shift into the extended content, how can people find more of you, Ellen? Because this is the framework and metaphor is fantastic, and so I want more people
Thank you. Thank
to
you.
to to
Uh,
find it and dive in.
yes, I would say to go to my website, which is ellenchute.com. You'll see the book. You'll see some blog posts. You'll see my podcast is on there. I also do a podcast. Not I'm an infant compared to you. Um, so the people on my podcast are people that are talking basically about families in one way or another, and we relate what they're talking to the car metaphor.
Hmm.
So it's interesting, and
Perfect.
I think that's there. Yes, so my website is the best place to access everything, and the
Well,
book is
perfect.
called What Drives You. Yes,
Yep. Well, thank you so much. All the information that you just shared, I'll throw in the show notes as well. So those of you
thank
listening,
you.
you can find that there. So, Ellen, thank you so much for the time so far, and I'm looking
Yes,
forward to continue it here.
thank you. Me too.